Hello and welcome to my Icon Corner. Today I have a special guest. We are interviewing Shayne Swenson, an Orthodox iconographer, and he is fairly well known. He has been called by one regional iconographer a miracle for this gift, this talent that he has for painting icons. So that is all I really need to say. Let me bring him into the channel here. Welcome, Shayne.
Hey, how's it going?
How are you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Okay. So for those who don't know, this icon that I have, let me move this icon over here, Prophet Daniel, was painted by Shayne, actually. So that's an example of his work. I actually wanted to start there. I wanted to ask about that icon. So do you remember like all the icons that you paint?
I don't know. Yeah, I guess maybe. Yeah, I do. I definitely don't forget them. But
Like, how many would you say you've painted over the years?
I couldn't tell you. Let me think. Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't tell you like an exact number because I paint every day. So, but I don't think I'd ever see an icon that I painted and not know that I painted it, I guess is the best way to put it. You know what I mean? So sometimes I'll see something and not really remember the details as much because it's been a couple years. But yeah, I always know. I think every icon painter, artist in general knows their work when they see it. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that's probably the most succinct way I could answer that.
Well, what I wanted to ask is about this. Like, what is, I want to know more about. I never really got to talk to you about this because I commissioned it and then it showed up in the mail.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't even know what style this is. Could you tell me more about this icon that I have?
Yeah. Well, it's based on a prototype that is in. I'm so bad with the names of these Athonite churches, but I believe it's what you would call loosely a Macedonian style. The style of iconography I paint is kind of all over the place. I don't have like I don't have like a specific school or period or like I don't really identify with like a specific ethnic tradition. I'm a convert, and when somebody asks me like, "Oh, what jurisdiction are you?" I don't really give an answer because I've gone to Antiochian churches. I was baptized in an Antiochian church. I go to an OCA parish, a Greek church, a Moscow Patriarchate church. So yeah, I don't really have like I'm not like Russian Orthodox or Greek Orthodox. I just consider myself, I'm an American that's an Orthodox Christian. So regarding iconography, yeah, that specific icon that I painted for you, I believe several years ago, but I believe I based it on a prototype of a wall fresco of the prophet Daniel. It's actually a pretty common's not the right way to put it because that sort of devalue, in our culture, the term common it sort of makes it sort of devalues it in our culture. So I don't mean it in that way. I just mean it's a very well done prototype. It's a very well done icon of the prophet Daniel, probably my favorite. So that's why I referenced it. But yeah, it's in, like I said earlier, I can't remember the name of the church, but it's in an Athonite. It's a fresco in an Athonite church, I believe. And the style, I believe it was painted by Manuel Panselenos, who's probably I believe it was Panselenos. He's probably like for lack of a better term, he's probably like the Da Vinci of iconography from that period. There's a lot of
what period is that?
It would be what's the year? I think it was somebody watching this is going to go, that's not right. I think it was like the 1200s, 1260s, something like that. Yeah, Panselenos. So in each culture, or I guess each geographic region where Orthodoxy is, you have these really prolific icon painters who sort of define the school or the style, like Saint Andre Rublev. There's these people that stand out, and Manuel Pencelenos is definitely one of those icon painters. So there's not a lot of like really good traditional prototypes for the Prophet Daniel icon. Surprisingly, there's not really a ton of any like Old Testament prophets. There's some, obviously, but there's not a wealth of them like we have for the apostles or something like that. So generally, when you go into a church and you see the wall paintings, generally we don't do like traditional real fresco here in the West. For no other reason than the building supplies we use don't really facilitate that. We don't really plaster walls, which is why when you go into a church in America or even Greece, you see painting done in acrylic on canvas that's then, think of it like wallpaper, essentially. It's then affixed to the wall. And true fresco, it's done occasionally. Some people do it, but part of the reason you don't see that in the States is because we use drywall, and you can't really, the nature of drywall, it doesn't really last forever like fresco does. So
what is the definition of fresco?
Oh man. Well, fresco is it's like a, how do I explain this without using art jargon? It's not really, fresco isn't something that's like uniquely Orthodox. It's just it's a technique to decorate a wall, basically. And I'm not going to go into the science or whatever, partly because I don't know all the science behind it, but generally speaking, when, like, for example, there's a St. Seraphim Cathedral in Santa Rosa, California. Father Patrick is the iconographer down there. I met him hung out with him one time. We're not like friends or anything, but I got to see what they were doing down there a couple years back when I went there with Avid Trifon. And how they do it is, I believe they have a couple guys that he works with, and it's really labor intensive. You have to have someone go in ahead of time and put the plaster up on the wall before you get in there, because it needs to like set up. Think of it like a cement, sort of like a cement. So the wall needs to be not quite dry, but not like wet, like you just put it on there. And you have a certain amount of time to paint whatever you're going to paint on the wall before it dries. And the idea is that the pigment and the carrier, like the paint, basically the liquid part, I'm pretty sure it's egg tempera. Then if you do it correctly, like if this is the wall and this is the paint on the wall, as it dries, the pigment and the binder, the liquid that the paint is carried in, kind of fuses within the wall, and it becomes part of the stone essentially. So there's another paint technology called silicate, which is used a lot in Russia. And I believe the technology for that came about in Germany in like the early 20th century, late 19th century, something like that. But anyway, that's predominantly what they use in Russia, I believe, from what I know. I'm not claiming to be some like, art materials expert or anything. This is just all from my own experience and from what I know from the research I've done and the people I know. Silicate paint is what is generally used in Russia. And it's functionally the same thing as fresco. It's just not quite as annoying to do. It's not quite as labor intensive. They still do real fresco all over the world. Like I said, there's a church in California, St. Seraphim Cathedral, where they're doing their entire church in real fresco. But sometimes fresco is used loosely to talk about the murals or the paintings that are on the walls inside of an Orthodox church when you go in there. It's just the technique that we use now, the more modern technique, is to use acrylic paint sometimes. I mean, I actually have a book by this iconographer from England named Aidan Hart, who's just a really, really great iconographer. It's a wealth of knowledge. He's a sweet guy too. Anyway, in his book, he talks about some people using egg tempera on canvas and placing it on the wall, which I've never heard of. but most of the time it's acrylic, and everything that I've been taught in that realm, from my friend, he's a Serbian iconographer, sort of I guess you could say my mentor teacher as far as that goes. It's all been done in acrylic essentially. So acrylic gets a bad rap, but yeah, it's mostly done in acrylic in the West, partly just because of the building supplies we use. So
I think that we actually at my parish, my local parish here, I think that's the acrylic on canvas. I think that's what they used. We have an entire clear story that's painted, and the back, and then the east and west walls also have iconography on them. So this is great. I'm learning. This is so informative. So I still have more questions about my icon. So I want to know, like, what was your did you choose that with he's holding the stone that became the great mountain in his hand?
that's not my creation.
That's not yours.
No, that's all part of the. In fact, when we're all done here, I can send you the drawing, and the way I painted it is my approach at the time, anyway. But the prototype. So usually, what happens with Orthodox iconography, you have sort of two different. Well, let me answer your first question before I spurred out and start talking about,
That's
iconography. Yeah, that design motif that you were just talking about in your icon. That's not something unique to me that I came up with at all. That's in the original fresco, how that is, that layout and all the subject matter. And so I used that prototype, or that icon, as reference, as a guide, I guess you could say, to design, to draw and paint yours. And that is a super common, that's just how we do it in the Orthodox Church. We don't, it's kind of hard to explain, but I'll give it a shot. It's not, just like everything in Orthodoxy, it's sort of a middle way. It's not necessarily about just rote copying all these icons that came before us, but you don't want to approach it, like I'm some artiste, like I'm going to create my own way. Like, that's not the way we do it. Or the way, I don't want to say we, like I don't represent anybody but myself. The way that
well, you represent the church, as I do, and I think all Orthodox Christians represent the church.
Well, we do, but I don't want to speak in a way like I'm an authority in any capacity, just because I don't view myself as that by any means. But yeah, basically there's two different schools of thought, especially right now. You have some iconographers who they just want to really stick to these icons that came before us, and what you would consider traditional icons, the traditional forms that we have. Like, you have all these different, icons of the Theotokos, and they all have a different story. Some are miraculous. All, I think, are miraculous in most instances, but they all have a different sort of design motif or name. You have, the Virgin of Vladimir, you know what I mean? You have all these different icons. And so there are some people who believe that we're not supposed to depart from not only what the subject matter that's contained within the icon and how it's laid out, but also the style, meaning the aesthetic, like how things are drawn and the look and the colors used. We're essentially just supposed to copy these icons and pass these along, because that's the Orthodox iconographic tradition. Okay, that's one. Who are we to change that? Basically, is the school of thought. Then you have this other school of thought that rejects that, not fully, not totally, but approaches it more. I think I tend to sort of be in the middle here, and I tend to lean towards what I'm about to tell you. There is a school of thought which is pretty common in Russia. Again, most of my experiences with Serbs and Russians, so I'm just going to use that as my jump off point. But there's a lot of room for creativity within Orthodox iconography, and just like, for example, I use this analogy I just did a live or something like this, a live stream like this recently, but I use this analogy. It's not a perfect analogy, but I'm going to use it anyway. Let's say you go to a Russian church across town, and then you go to a Serb church or whatever. You go to two different Orthodox churches, and you go into one Sunday, and the priest is chanting the liturgy. Okay. The next Sunday, you go to the other church, and the priest is chanting the liturgy. If they're canonically ordained priests in good standing that are doing what most priests do, they're chanting the liturgy. They're chanting the same words. It might be in a different language, maybe, but generally the words are the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, or the liturgy of St. Basil, usually those two. But the difference is that Church A, you're going to hear something different than you do at Church B, right? Because they're two different people. There's two different priests chanting this liturgy. It's the same liturgy, but each of them approaches it a little bit differently. Now, they're not intentionally, neither of these priests, I've never met a priest that's done this. Neither of these priests are approaching their job as a priest, saying this liturgy, chanting this liturgy. They're not approaching it like, man, today I'm going to put on the performance of a lifetime. And none of them would do that. Maybe some, but I've literally never met a priest who approaches that in that way. But it sounds different, and there's a beauty, even if it's chanted not in the right key, even there's a beauty there. It's you can't really put it into words, at least for me, in the differences in how each of these priests chanted. So how that applies to iconography is basically there's room for individuality and creativity, but you don't approach it with that in mind. Does that make sense? It happens on its own because God has made each one of us individuals. And even though we all reflect the image of God, but we all have our own individuality with that comes through regardless of whether or not we are putting that forward. Now, the error comes in when you decide that's what I'm going to focus on, not the tradition of iconography. Does that make sense? So if the priest,
Sure.
went into the liturgy like, today I'm gonna chant this liturgy, and it's just gonna be the most beautiful liturgy ever, and everyone's just gonna think I'm a great singer. Maybe he might be a great singer, and if he goes in thinking that, he might chant a beautiful liturgy, but before God, that's he's not really in a good place. And it's the same thing with iconography. There's room for creativity and what I would call artistic innovation, but when that supersedes keeping it within the boundaries of the tradition, the canonical tradition, then we have a problem. And that's when people depart and they start doing crazy things that I would consider wrong or incorrect. The people who are in the first camp I talked about, who just want to reproduce these old icons, these old Cretan icons or Russian icons or whatever, they would definitely disagree with this. But most of the people I know who are in the camp that I would consider myself in, which is more open to development of the aesthetic, would also consider that to be a grave error. And so, just like everything in Orthodoxy, man, you have to, I don't want to say it's not really, razor's edge isn't the right way to put it, because it's not, but you want to sort of maintain things right down the middle, if that makes sense.
Okay, so good. Now I know all about my personal icon of my patron saint. Now let's see. The next question I have actually is, so it's fairly well known that you're a spiritual son of Abbot Trifon, as am I.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes us related spiritually. We are we're brothers. We share spiritual DNA. I'm curious about the story, how that came about, how you got to be into that position and that relationship.
Yeah. So let me think. I forget the year. It was a while ago. I think it was. I don't even think I was I was an inquirer. I think I was just loosely an inquirer at the time. Um, and I was Roman Catholic, and I had somehow, I even forget how I even became friends with this guy. But there's this guy you met, you remember Jason, don't you, from Canada? He used to
Yeah,
write for
yeah, yeah,
Death of the
yeah,
World. Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
Jason Lisk. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I met him somehow, on Facebook or online somewhere. He has no online presence anymore, which is crazy. But he was a writer. He was super into writing at the time, and I'd read something on his like personal blog or something, and I encountered him somewhere online, and we started chatting, and then just kind of became casual acquaintances online. And he shared an article he wrote for Death of the World with me, and
I
that's
remember
sort of
that.
that's when I discovered all that and was like, oh, okay.
Okay.
And yeah, that's when I discovered all that stuff. And then after a while, he was like, well, hey, why don't you? I'm going to be over at the monastery at this time. Why don't you come over and you know meet Abbot Trifon? And I'd known about Abbot Trifon. I wasn't let's say I wasn't like a fan is the wrong word. He does have fans, but I wasn't like plugged in as much to like his podcast at that time or his blog or anything. But I definitely knew who he was, and I think I had like a couple years before that, I think I may have emailed him or something like that. But anyway, yeah, and so I went over and met him, through Jason, and yeah, we immediately became good friends. Just one of those things that when you meet someone and you click, and yeah, he's been a really I've had a really interesting relationship with him because he's been very persistent with me as far as the church goes. I don't make it any secret, ever since I came into the church. If you're in the church for any period of time, you will encounter the reality of living as an Orthodox Christian if you're doing it right, and you will encounter good clergy, and you will encounter bad clergy and bad hierarchs and good hierarchs. That's just the name of the game. And yeah, me and my family went through some pretty gnarly experiences. That's all I'll really say. And Abbot Trifon specifically personally suffered for me and my family,
Mm-hmm.
and totally unwarranted in my opinion, and anyone that really looks at the situation. But he willfully did that, and so yeah, he's always sort of been. I mean, it's more than just like he's my confessor, guy that I text or whatever when I'm having problems. He's quite literally like my dad. We have that relationship. A lot of the some of the superficiality that you would have maybe with your parish priest if you go to like a large parish or whatever, that's not there at all. Like I know him really well. I know all those monks really well, and I'm not like bragging, like name dropping or anything. I'm just saying like that's how our relationship is, and it's a huge blessing because there's times that I need someone to check up on me like that, and he's very well. This. He's really, really good at checking up on you. He's really good at, you know what I mean? Like, hey, how are you? Sending you a message right when you need it, or maybe when you don't want him to be messaging you, he'll keep doing it. You know what I mean? Maybe at the time you're kind of annoyed, but afterward, it's always like, man, I'm really glad he did that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how I met him, and then our friendship and relationship just sort of grew and blossomed from there. So
Yeah, I feel it's a blessing to have that relationship with him. I also feel it's a responsibility. It's like sort of in the way of the more you've been given, the more will be asked of you. That's
yeah.
that's how I kind of look at it. Okay. Uh, Third question here. Let's see. So you have a YouTube channel, and you started That's been up for a while, but right, you've had that for
No,
or
I've only really started putting videos up there the last couple of weeks.
r-
Actually, I've
oh,
had the
okay.
account for like a couple of years, but I never
Right,
did anything
right.
with it.
That's what I
So
meant.
yeah,
So you've recently started posting these tutorials. I think this is actually a good idea. This will be a great resource for your channel. This is video tutorials on how to do iconography. Is that the idea for the channel?
yeah. It's. I mean, my real goal isn't necessarily to like teach people every step of how to paint an icon. It's mostly to dispel some of the, oh, how do I put it? It's just sort of, well, it's just a glimpse on how I do things. One of the misconceptions I had when I first started painting iconography is that there's a very strict, systematic way to paint an icon. And if you don't do it that way, you're doing it incorrectly, you know? I mean, there is that, again, there is that school of thought. I get emails and messages on social media literally every day from people unhappy with something I'm doing.
Hmm.
You know, but or correcting me somehow for something or whatever. And so yeah, I mean that is one approach. There are schools in Russia and Greece, and that's totally cool. If I could, you know, uproot myself for a year and go to Serbia or Russia or Greece and to traditionally study over there, I mean, I would have done it 10 years ago, you know, but unfortunately, that's just not something my life can facilitate. So my main goal with doing this YouTube channel is to dispel some of the myths that people might believe about painting iconography, and to maybe, I don't know, maybe that will inspire more Americans to take it up, because something that I'm very concerned is the wrong word, something that I'm very I don't like to say passionate about because that gets thrown around a lot, but something that I'm interested in is inspiring more competent people to begin to paint iconography and to pursue it in a professional capacity here in the United States for the church in the United States. There's nothing wrong with employing someone from Greece or Russia or Belarus or wherever. And I understand why churches do that. The money goes a little further and the quality is just better. They, you know, in some instances they've been doing this for 2,000 years, so they're going to have a greater handle on it than the Americans who've, you know, we're just sort of figuring this orthodoxy thing out. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's really important for if orthodoxy is going to really grow in the States, for us to have iconographers and investment makers and, you know, all the different crafts and arts that are important and necessary for the liturgical life of the Orthodox Church. I really think it should be there, more value and more emphasis should be placed on building that up in the United States by American craftsmen, if that makes sense. And there's people that are doing that. I'm not trying to mischaracterize and say that, oh, you know, it's this desert and there's nobody. There are people and organizations based, I think, mostly jurisdictionally, that are doing that. You have really cool websites like Orthodox Arts Journal. You have people doing that. But my whole goal with the YouTube channel isn't to walk people through each and every the minutia of painting an icon, because I could never make all the videos, right? It's to maybe take away some people's fear, and for them to just jump into it. I get questions all the time. How do you do this? How do I do that? How do I start painting icons? And how I did it was when I discovered that there really wasn't this like one sanctified approach to painting an icon, that there really is an art to it. I mean, there's definitely a technique and an approach. You know, that's why a lot of it is step by step. There's an approach to do it, but it's not. I personally don't really. I don't lean into this idea that each and every step is somehow always like an act of prayer, every single thing. Like there is an aspect of that to it 100%. It's not like painting a portrait of a celebrity or something like that. Not at all. Don't misunderstand me. But there is absolutely 100% there's a way to paint an icon that if you get too hung up on just focusing on like saying a Jesus prayer with every paintbrush stroke. I've heard that a lot of times from people in various parishes. And if that's what you do when you paint an icon, that is totally fine. However, if you're painting iconography and like if someone commissions an icon, I can't do that because it already takes me forever to get somebody an icon anyway because of how my life is. And, so if I did that, I would never get any work done. And I remember asking, and these aren't ideas that I just came up with on my own. This Russian friend of mine, I asked him, my Serbian friend who lives, lives around here, is painting a church south of us here. All of these questions I've asked people. A lot of this stuff I didn't just come up with on my own. So don't misunderstand me. But I asked them, like, well, am I supposed to, when I first began painting, I asked these people, am I supposed to be doing this? Or I heard that if you don't do this at this certain stage, then it's not a real icon. You'll hear that a lot. That's not a real icon, whatever. And a lot of the times these people would just sort of laugh, not in a condescending way. They would just find it humorous. Like, where did you hear that? And I remember my friend, my Russian friend who really helped me out a lot when I first started said, what's more important and what is of more value to the church? You serving God and getting these icons done and to people so that they can use them for what they're intended to, or sitting there and saying a Jesus prayer each time that you have a brush stroke or whatever, and like fixating on that. You can do both. You just need to find a way to do this and produce the icon, but also do it in a prayerful way and not get hung up on one or the other. And so regarding, these videos that I'm making on my YouTube, it's mostly just inspiration. And people, as they're just starting out, you'll learn stuff along the way. But the best way to begin learning how to paint iconography, I'll tell you the secret. If you really want to get into doing it, the secret is this: pay really close attention. Do it. I can't tell you how many people they just don't do it because they don't want to do it wrong. You know what I mean? And that's good. Mm-hmm. Like, you want to approach the tradition. You don't want to be arrogant about it and go, I'm God's gift to, no, you can't. That's not the way to do it. Every morning before I paint, there's a specific prayer that I pray at the end, because I do my prayer rule in the morning. And then there's a prayer that I pray right before I begin painting. That's totally a part of it. If you're not doing that, and regular confession, living the life of the church, just the basic stuff, then you shouldn't be painting iconography. That being said, it can be daunting and it can be frustrating, but just jump into it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Yep. Like the next video that I'm doing and currently planning, I've got 10,000 irons in the fire right now. I paint iconography, professionally, I guess you could say, every single day. I do that for hours, 6 to 7 hours a day. But I also I have a secular job that I go to 3 days a week still. 5 children, I have a lot going on in my life. But I still devote that time to painting iconography, because when you do it for long enough, it becomes a necessity. It becomes a vocation of its own, if that makes sense. And you really do become a servant of the church. And if you're going to do it in that capacity, or at least aspire to, as I said earlier in the conversation, you have to approach it with humility and an understanding, an openness to learn and to be corrected, and an understanding that you have to operate within the bounds of the tradition. But as I said earlier, just because there's these boundaries, these fences, doesn't mean, that you don't have free range of motion within the corral that you're in. That's the best way I can put it. And any any sort of tradition, whether that's martial arts or even other art traditions from other cultures. Like, for example, I mean, it's no secret I've been a tattoo artist for 20 years. And one of the styles of tattooing that I do is Japanese tattooing. And there's these really sort of strict aesthetic boundaries that if you venture too far outside one or the other, it loses, it becomes incoherent. It doesn't look like a Japanese tattoo. Well, it's the same thing with iconography. If you get too creative and you venture too far to the left or to the right, it becomes what is referred to as uncanonical. Whether that's the imagery depicted, like, for example, this is a great example to use, is when you see the depiction of God the Father in an icon. That's a non-canonical or uncanonical depiction, because it violates the dogma and the teaching of the church, you know. So that's one way to be non-canonical, but another way is to completely depart from the Byzantine aesthetic, if that makes sense. So anyway,
so
yeah,
like the ancient, the icon of the Ancient of Days, we actually have one in our parish. It's the Ancient of Days with the white beard. That's God the Father, right? Isn't that?
No. That's the pre-incarnate Christ.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
there's actually two. There's an icon very similar to that. I actually don't know. I'm about 4 scripts written to my. I'm doing a part of the other thing I'm doing on the YouTube channel is I'm doing a concise history of Orthodox iconography. The reason I'm doing it is it's kind of a selfish reason, because I have a lot of holes in my knowledge, and I want to. The best way to learn something is to teach it.
Absolutely.
And so I'm going through, and I'm once I have my 5th script written, then I'm probably gonna pull the trigger on it. But the idea is to go through and, you know, do a history of Orthodox iconography from the beginning, all the way up to, you know, trends in the current day. And I also want to, along the way, take snapshots of really important iconographers in the history of the traditions with an S, because there's multiple traditions of Orthodox iconography. But as far as the icon you brought up, yeah, I don't know a ton about that controversy. What I know is just stuff that I've gleaned from reading. I think I read an article on Orthodox Arts Journal. Maybe it was there, some other, maybe there's a, can't think of it. There's a really great website run by an unbeliever of all people. I don't want to say the name because there's 2 different ones. There's Russian Icons, and then there's another one like Icon Reader. I think the Russian Icons one is the one that's by someone who's just agnostic or whatever, but just like an art collector. But they're also a historian, and they do a really good job. If you can get over their, like, sometimes they make snide comments. If you can ignore that, you can get a lot of really good historical knowledge about more specifically Russian iconography, but they go into Greek iconography as well. But anyway, yeah, there's a couple articles on some of those icon websites, and it talks about the heretical icon of where you see God the Father, God the Son, and then the Holy Spirit, which is a dove. Sometimes I've seen like I think I saw like Christ as a child, like Emmanuel or whatever. And there's a couple different versions of it. I'm not, like I said, I'm not an expert on that specific controversy, but I do know when you see the Ancient of Days where it's Christ depicted with his hair is white.
Right.
Yeah, that's not the heretical icon that everyone's talking about. Okay. This is a huge topic that everybody talks about all the time, so I'll probably do a deep dive episode on this eventually when I get around to it. But yeah, that's what that is.
So like, how often do you think you'll be plan on posting videos on your YouTube channel?
Well, once I get the history podcast going, I'm going to do, the reason I'm stacking up scripts is so that I can do it regularly. Because the last time I tried to do this, I have negative free time. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even have time to, like, yeah. So, once it's launched, at least one history episode a month and then one icon walkthrough. I don't know though, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
It's just something that's going to develop, and God willing, we'll see what happens to it. There's another really, really, really good instructional channel on YouTube. I'm not getting paid. I don't really know this guy, but he does really solid stuff. It's that Painting the Light channel. I think he's got like 40,000 subs now.
Yeah.
He does really good stuff from a more Greek kind of like really traditional Cretan iconography, that style perspective. I don't agree with him on everything. I'm sure he doesn't agree with me. I've never met an iconographer who, if we were to have one of these conversations, we would totally agree on everything. Artists in general are usually fairly opinionated people, unfortunately. So, but if you're looking for really, really good instructional stuff, besides plugging my own channel, that guy is probably doing the best stuff you can encounter. So
Okay. So you mentioned you have a busy schedule. What is could you maybe elaborate on your painting schedule and maybe how long it takes for you to paint an icon?
yeah, so well, I wear a couple different hats. I work for an Orthodox media company that I don't want to name at this point. If I did, everyone would know who it is. I work for them as an artist / designer. Yeah, and I wear multiple hats for them too. So they've started to take up a little more of my time now that I've taken a more permanent sort of set of responsibilities with them. So that takes up a good chunk of my time. But every single day, no matter what, usually Sundays, I tend to be a little looser with my work schedule because, the whole not working on Sunday thing, but I still paint a little bit. But yeah, so I get up pretty early in the morning. I get up around 2 to 3 a.m. It just depends. And I paint from, probably about 2:30 or 3 till 9, 10, sometimes 11. It just depends. Now,
Do you take breaks?
yeah, I mean, I've got a bunch of kids, so
Okay.
it's the reason why I get up early is not because it's not some ascesis where I'm some like I'm not like Elder Frem where I am not sleeping for ascetic reasons. Like I just go to bed early. I just have my schedule's like almost like a swing shift basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I sleep about 5-6 hours a night. It's doable. It took me about a year to get used to doing that, but that's not the issue here. The issue is time with my kids and my other. I still tattoo, which some people are clutching their pearls hearing that. I still tattoo out of necessity. But I'm in that spot where I'm at a point now where I sort of have to decide to go all in with iconography and serving the Orthodox Church in a more formal capacity, full time with iconography and art, just generally, because it's really difficult to sort of have 2 full-time jobs. Even if I was not in this profession, either profession, if you work you go 7 hours and then you go somewhere and work 7. If you work 14 hours a day, that's burning the candle at both ends, and eventually you got to kind of make a choice. So, yeah, it takes me a little bit to get commissions out sometimes, and people don't really understand that aspect because it's not something I share with people when they commission an icon because it just kind of sounds weird, well, I'll get it to you when I get it to you, but it just sounds odd. But yeah, I pause taking commissions too. You know what I mean? I'll take them and then I'll stop, catch up with what I have to do and then start taking them again. Right now, I'm a little bit behind on getting my commissions out. I'm doing almost done actually with this, doing a large iconographic illustration for an Eastern Catholic media company. And then I'm doing some other very large icons for a seminary, an Orthodox seminary, and then bigger projects essentially is what I'm starting to do now. But yeah, I get inquiries about personal icons, kind of like the one I did for you, all the time, and I'm happy to take them on and do them. But sometimes I can get it to you within 2 weeks. Other times it'll take me 6 months. It just depends on my schedule and where I'm at in both of my work schedules. Hopefully, God willing, in the next year or two, I can just devote myself totally to iconography, and then once that happens, I think I'll be able to have a more regular, predictable delivery schedule. So.
Okay. So are you taking commissions at the moment? I think you.
Yes, and I mean it just depends on the expectation of the person that wants the icon. You know what I mean? It's like I have other people. I have other people that I'm beholden to right now that I'm doing work for essentially, and the work that I do for this Orthodox media company also is a priority. So yeah, I mean, I love to take commissions on. After the first of the year, I'll be all caught up with these bigger projects, and I'm going to have a little bit different of a system, I think. It's just I've been really blessed and overwhelmed with the interest, and I want to be able to. It's a huge blessing for me to be able to paint an icon for someone and to know that they're going to use this icon to pray. It's just I can't even think of the words. Like it's a huge blessing, and it's really surreal, and it's yeah, I just can't think of the words. So it's I want, if I could take on every single commission that every single person wanted to do, I would absolutely 100% do that. But I don't want to take something on and then be like, yes, I can't get your icon to you for 8 months. Sorry, that people tend to be a little disappointed by that. So I would be too.
Yeah, these icons last basically forever. I mean, if they're taken care of, they,
Right.
like thousands of years. So I chose for the title of this stream, how to commission an icon.
Yeah.
And I have actually, I'll be honestly, I have been when I see people with icons of the Prophet David, I have been coveting their icons for years, and I have actually been considering asking you. Well, let's just what I want to do here. Let's walk through. Let's say I want to commission an icon of the Prophet David from you.
Okay.
And so let's walk through that process, just so people would know if they wanted to do this if they want to have a hand painted icon of their patron saint or something. So, we could talk about sizes and, styles and, all those things. So where do we start?
Well, usually what people will do, is they'll either contact me on social media or my website. I have a contact form on my website. You can, just like any other website, you go down and put your name and email and then what you want or whatever, and shoot me a message. And and usually what I do is I fire back questions. Eventually, I want to have a page on my website, sort of like an FAQ, like a frequently asked questions. Because the number one question I get when people ask me that want to commission an icon, they say, "How much is an icon?" Mm-hmm. And that's a difficult question for me to answer, because it's like saying, "How much is a car? How much is a meal?" It's like there's a lot of variables. So what I want to do is have it set up, and I mean, people don't, they don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So
right.
I want to have some sort of like a frequently asked questions, or maybe even like a form that you can kind of click through and give me a better idea of your specifics, and then send the message out. And that'll really cut down on reply time and communication time. But anyway, yeah, people will ask me how much is an icon, or sometimes they'll give me more specifics. Like you wanted an icon of David, and there's a lot of different ways you can do it. I will email them back. Okay, great. What size do you want? Do you have a specific prototype? And I keep using that word prototype or model.
Mm-hmm.
What that is that, like we were talking about earlier, there are different historical examples of icons.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'll ask is, if someone's like, I want an icon of Christ. Okay, well, there's literally hundreds of models or prototypes, different icons of Christ. They all have similar attributes, but they're all a little different, So I'll ask, do you have a prototype or a model? And then I'll say, do you have a preference on panel? Because there's a couple different ways we can do this, depending on how much money you want to spend, how traditional you want to be. I could paint you an icon on, a piece of hardboard, which is like, I don't think I have any. Yeah, I probably do have some around. A piece of this is on this Father Seraphim Rose portrait's on hardboard. You see that? See how thin that is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mostly do oil painting on these, but this is hardboard. It's just like referred to sometimes as masonite, essentially. Or there's, like a traditional icon panel, which is, forgive me, I'll grab you this. Something like this, which has got the braces in the back to keep it from warping. It's got this like frame. It's called a kovchig, which is this recessed area that's carved. And
that's probably like the size I would want. That's like about, what is that size? That's like.
This is I forget. That's done in metric because these are from my former icon panel supplier that I no longer am allowed to do business with because of an awesome stupid war. But anyway, yeah, my friend Dimitri and me, I bought panels from him for like 8 years, and right when this global problem kicked off, I just made like a really big icon panel order, and he couldn't get my money. Anyway, it was a disaster. But so I'm still on the lookout for someone that can provide me with panels. But anyway, so that's more of like a traditional panel. And then there are like this is another what you would call a traditional panel. I don't know if you can see it has the braces, but they're more inside the wood.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I like that.
See, and but this is flat. It doesn't have that recessed kovchig area. Okay. So that's one style. And all of these you can do at any size basically. And then what a lot of icons in the States is they're on Baltic birch plywood. Okay. Baltic birch plywood is different than the plywood that you use to like frame your shed or something like that. Baltic birch plywood. I wonder if I have any. Oh man, I should have prepared more. I do, but I don't want to get up and screw up the stream. Baltic birch plywood. It looks really similar to this. You know what I just showed you with this flat panel. The dimensions and stuff are the same, but it doesn't require those braces built into it. The reason you see those big thick pieces of wood in an icon in an old school like traditional panel like that, the reason you see these is to lessen the effects of warpage over time. So you go to the monastery, you go inside their church, and they have a bunch of those really old icons up. If you notice, there's one of the Theotokos up on the wall, and it's warped. It's bent, kind of like that. And it has these braces in the back, and these braces stop it from warping further than it normally would. I have an icon here hanging up off camera here that I purchased. It's probably about 250 years old, and it has those braces in the back of it, and it's completely flat, and it's probably about 250 years old. So anyway, but with Baltic birch, you don't need to do that. You don't need to have those built into it, because the birch plywood is essentially so warp resistant that it's not really going to warp like that over time. That's the theory. They didn't have plywood 200 years ago. So a lot of these modern materials like plywood, acrylic, all this stuff, there's a lot of unknowns. But I mean, from what we know so far, they're going to stick around. That's my opinion. I don't see any issue with this stuff, by the way. But anyway, so those are some of the options, and then I'll ask, okay, what kind of panel do you have? A preference on style or period or school? You have the Cretan school, Macedon. You have all these different periods, and even within like Greek iconography or Serbian iconography or especially Russian iconography, you have these different schools and time periods and geographic regions where you have all these different like variations in style and color and aesthetic. Okay. So I'll ask that if I don't get any information about it, basically. And then oftentimes people are overwhelmed with, with all the questions that I fire back.
Right.
They're like, I don't know. I just want an icon of Christ,
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then I'll sort of take the reins and help the person kind of figure out what they want.
Okay.
I'd say 85% of the time, people already kind of know what they're after. And, I do a lot of what I would call original iconography. But I also, one of my favorite things to do is I like to reproduce icons from old prototypes. Remember at the beginning of our conversation, I talked about there's this one school of thought that all we're supposed to do is just reproduce these old prototypes. I enjoy doing that. I do that. I do what's called, I oil paint too. I'm super into Western art. And one way that you learn how to oil paint, a traditional way, is by doing what are called master copies. And essentially what you do is you do a copy of a painting by Rembrandt or whatever artist you're trying to learn their technique. You look at their painting and you copy it. And the reason you do that is that's how you learn their technique. It helps you sort of back engineer how they did things. And then you absorb these techniques into your technique, essentially. And just like iconography, Western art, whether that's, Baroque, whatever, like period, romantic or whatever period you're talking about, there's a specific approach and school or style or school to getting your art to look like what are called in Western art, old masters, essentially. And so regarding iconography, you can take the same approach. And now I'm not a big fan of taking an icon and beating it up and making it look old, like antiquing it or relicking it. I'm not into that at all. I don't think that that's a good idea because that to me, my personal opinion is you're crossing a little bit of a line and devaluing the icon into merely art. That's just one of my own personal things. I don't judge anyone for doing it. I just don't do that. But as far as copying, like trying to get something as exact as I possibly can of, let's say, like, some famous icon of Christ from Mount Athos or something. If someone requests that, I'll absolutely do that for them. And one of the icons, is the Sinai. The Sinai Pantocrator of Christ. I paint that all the time. In fact, I have a giant, I'm doing a huge one. It's literally off to my right over here on canvas to be mounted on a wall. So I love reproducing old icons. It's one of my favorite things to do. So once we can establish all that, then usually what happens is, I'll come up with a price, and that all ranges wildly. Usually if someone wants to commission an icon, I can usually do something for them at almost any budget. So let's say they want to get an icon of their patron saint, a hand-painted one, but they don't have like an icon like this. Now this isn't completed, obviously. I started this like a long time ago, and it's in my stack of icons that haven't been completed. St. Demetrios. Something like this size, I would probably charge with gold, I would probably charge between $400 and $700. It just depends on the content. So for like an icon or this, for example, like if someone didn't have a ton of money, let's say they only had a couple $100s and they wanted an icon of their patron saint and they're on a budget, something like this icon, of Saint Anne, a bust like this, just the head, with gold. This has gold and silver. I don't know if you can see that very well.
A
So
little bit.
something like this, it's on a thicker panel, but it's on hardboard mounted. Okay.
Huh. Okay.
So this panel, it doesn't cost me, like, for example, a traditional icon panel, that in and of itself is a work of art and requires a skilled hand to make. Well, that costs money. So I don't make those panels. There are some panels that I do make myself, like out of the plywood I mentioned earlier. I will make those. I tend to like to buy the panels because, I'm a painter, not a woodworker. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So if you want something like that, it increases the price. But if you are on a budget or something like that, like something like this, I can usually do for a couple $100, and that's usually within the budget of everybody. So,
Yeah.
I just like to make that available, at every price point. And if somebody wants to spend $2,000 on a, then I'm all for that too. But the whole purpose is I'm not selling people art. You know what I mean? I do. I mean, I have paintings and I oil paints. Like, I sell people my art, but that's not the point of this. I'm not approaching it that way. I'm not just selling people art. An icon is a piece of art in one sense, but it's obviously, as Orthodox Christians, we believe it's much more than that, And so part of the reason I like to sort of have, I don't want to call them tiers of icons, but I just want hand painted iconography to become more accessible to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with having a print, but the goal should be to move away from prints. This is just my opinion. The goal should be to move away from prints and to move towards hand painted iconography. It would be this. You can make sort of a similar argument with, thank God we're not using recorded chant in our churches. Like we don't play a CD of like the men's choir from the St. Petersburg Cathedral or whatever. Like, we don't do that, thank God. But you can kind of make an argument that mass printed and mounted icons are a blessing, but they shouldn't be where we stop, and I don't care if you hire me or commission whoever. You should do whatever you can to acquire a hand-painted unique icon, because if you have something like that, you're going to treasure it and you're going to value it just on its own merit. But if it's also in your icon corner and it's of your patron saint or of Christ or the Mother of God, and every single day you're doing your prayer rule and you're venerating that and you're praying with this icon, you're going to develop an attachment, not necessarily to the physical matter that the icon is, but it really is a blessing and a grace to have a hand painted icon like that. You develop a really closer relationship with God and your patron saint. And it's just my experience. You tend to value not only the icon, but that relationship a lot more. I can't tell you, if you haven't experienced that, it's just a huge blessing to have something like that.
Yeah.
That you use for your own personal prayer life. So I like to try to make that available to everybody, no matter what your economic situation is.
Yeah, it's really nice to have a hand painted icon. It's like night and day. It's like alive, I guess. It seems.
Right.
So that gold leaf, how much does that gold leaf add to it? Like, I mean, it's not.
I mean, it's not necessarily the material. I mean, it's not cheap, but it's the it's a little, it just adds to the amount of labor that goes into it, if that makes
Oh.
sense. Like I said, it's not that like gold's cheap, that's real gold. But it's gilding, that's when you apply the gold to the panel. It can be really labor intensive, and it just depends on the way that you apply it. There's a bunch of different ways to apply the gold leaf. I tend to use a more modern way, which is with either an oil or a water-based, what's called miction, or it's just a varnish essentially. Think of it like a glue, a fancy glue, and you put that on there. You wait for it to dry, but not be too dry. It kind of has to be in between. It has to be dry, but tacky a little bit. And then you apply the gold leaf, and there's a technique to do all this stuff.
Oh, okay.
I'm currently probably in the next, hopefully I should say, God willing, in the next year, I'm going to move more towards traditional, it's called water gilding, or, with clay bowl and all that stuff. It's a difficult technique to learn on your own, but I'm going to give it a shot. And I have a good couple Romanian friends who, in my opinion, they tend to do some of the most high skilled gilding in the world regarding iconography. So I have some people that are willing to, at least from a distance, help me get this under my hands a little bit. But yeah, it's functionally just a labor thing. So I think gold in general, I prefer. At the least, I prefer gold in the halo or the nimbus or whatever you want to call it. I prefer gold at a minimum there, but there is something that just really beautifies an icon if the entire thing is gilded. And I mean that might add a couple $100 to it, depending on how you do it or who does it, but it's absolutely 100% worth it.
Yeah, so I'm actually serious about this icon. I might keep you. I'm gonna stay in touch with you, and might. How many iconographers do we have here in the United States? Do you even know? I mean,
well, here's the thing. It's so in the United States, there's quite a few people there's a lot of people that paint iconography, and a lot of people do it. It's hard to say. I mean, there's a lot of people that do it. It depends on what application the icon is used in. Like if it's, for example, I had to get a blessing from the Metropolitan to have my iconography used in a liturgical setting, or to be able to paint an icon that is in a church. Okay. That's when I was in the Antiochian Archdiocese. Okay, Metropolitan Joseph personally gave me his blessing that his iconography can be used in a church. Okay, you have to get that if you want that in the Antiochian Archdiocese. At least you used to have to. I don't know about now, but I don't really know, and because there's a lot of people in every parish usually who paint icons,
right? But like professionally, people who could,
right. I mean, there's a few, there's I can't really give a number. There's not enough.
Right.
I'll just put it that way. There's not enough. And what I said earlier about when churches bring icon painters over from overseas, I wasn't putting shade on that at all, because there's a reason why. It's because they're usually more skilled, more experienced. The money that the church has to spend on this iconography sometimes, not always, goes a little bit further occasionally. But my whole point with bringing that up is it would be cool to see more icon painters coming up in the United States who got to a professional level, if that makes sense. There's really there's no way to put that. But sometimes people get salty if you talk about, iconography, skilled iconography at a professional level. You tend not to get that attitude in Orthodox countries, I mean, because the standards are really high. But in the States, I've gotten grief from some people, saying, oh, well, we don't view our iconography like that, and it doesn't matter if it's more folkish, or, the drawing isn't quite right or whatever. I don't particularly agree with that. If you go to a parish and you listen to the chanting, and if it's off key and just not done well, it affects the liturgy. And it's just better when the person is skilled and knows what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, someone who does, if you hire someone to build the church building, and they're giving it their best effort, and they might not be professional or at least have a solid skill set to do that sort of construction, but their heart is in the right place. Like, no, like you need to have skilled, qualified craftsmen, right? And so it's the same thing with iconography, and that's partly why I think Metropolitan Joseph required him to sort of give a blessing, at least look over the iconography, to sort of keep that standard up at a, for lack of a better term, a professional level. So there is so much untapped ability in the Orthodox Church in the West from Americans, okay? And it would be really cool in the next 20 years to see more people decide to jump into it with
Mm-hmm.
A, the right attitude, that, first and foremost, and B, with the same mentality to build our own tradition as the church matures. I think eventually, when we're ready, God will bless us with a unified Orthodox Church,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll sort of bust out of this necessary but unfortunate situation we have with these jurisdictions. And I think when we start trending towards that, I think if we're around as a country, I don't know the way things are going, but it's impossible for it not to happen. Orthodox iconography has developed over time. There's this misunderstanding that what you see, as far as how, I'm not talking about the content of the iconography. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm not talking about the Seventh Ecumenical Council. I'm not talking about the utility or the purpose of our iconography or the theology or the dogma behind it. Don't even think about that. What I'm talking about is how the iconography looks, the aesthetics, the way it's drawn, the colors used. That developed, okay? That developed out of, I won't go into that. Listen to my podcast, okay, if you want to learn about that. But anyway, iconography develops, okay? And that's why I use traditions with an S, because there are different traditions. If you look at an icon from, the Moscow school versus like a Cretan icon, there's similarities. There's a lot of similarities, and the content is the same, like an icon of the Nativity, or like a Theophany or something like that. The content is the same, and the truth that's being proclaimed in that icon is the same, but the aesthetics, how things are drawn, the proportions, the way things are placed, that stuff varies by culture and by time period and by tradition, okay? Canonical tradition. Well, what we're seeing going on now in the world of iconography is the exact same thing. And, connecting back to what I said about those two different schools of thought, where you have what I would call the more rigid, it has to look exactly like those old icons. And then you have people who are exploring, for lack of a better term, the evolution of the iconographic aesthetic within the confines of the theology, okay? The people who are doing in column B are more in keeping with the whole tradition of iconography as a whole, okay? The Cretan school, it developed. You didn't have iconography that looked like Theophanes the Cretan, okay? He's one of my favorites. He defined, in my opinion, as I said in that last YouTube video I did, he sort of defines Cretan iconography. Like when someone has a mental picture, think of a Byzantine Orthodox icon, they're probably going to be thinking about an icon painted by Theophanes the Cretan, or Astropis, or any of those guys within that specific period. Okay, but those icons don't look like icons that came 300 years, 400 years before. That tradition, that aesthetic developed essentially, okay? And then from there, that developed on, and then as it moved into Russia, There was a cross-cultural exchange. Again, listen to my upcoming podcast if you'd like to learn the details and the minutia of that. And what we're seeing now is sort of I don't want to say a rediscovery, but a reignition of that. So there's something new going on, and that's not always a bad thing. Okay. One of my favorite iconographers and people of the 20th century was Photios Kontoglou. Okay. And, he's an iconographer, and he wrote a lot about Byzantine iconography and the theology behind it. You ever heard of Saints Raphael, Nicholas, and Irene?
No.
Man, I'm going to send you. It's crazy to me. A lot of us in America haven't heard of these saints. I'm going to send you some stuff, and if you're watching or listening to this and you don't know who Saints Raphael, Nicholas, and Irene are, Google it. It'll blow your mind. I'll give you just a quick synopsis of the story. In, I believe, the 1950s, there's an island called Lesbos in Greece. Okay, and long story short, there's the people that live there started getting, like, not just one person, but like I think a metropolitan, and then like lay people and a priest or something. There was a priest monk, the same one, started visiting these people in their dreams. Okay, in like sometime in the 1950s, and he was telling these people to dig in a certain area, and some people were even outside and they saw this off on the horizon line over where they were told to dig. They would see like a priest monk sensing, and then they'd go over there and nobody'd be there, right? Anyway, again, look it up to get all the details, because I'm hesitant to even convey the story because I'm probably not going to give all the information right. But it's one of my favorite saint stories. It's one of my favorite Orthodox things, I guess you could say, is this story. And anyway, they started digging in this one area. They hired like these contractors or something to dig, because they were all told, that there's these saints' relics here. And so they started digging, and what do they find? They find bones, and one of the stories is like one of the construction workers was like scoffing or something, and he like hit one of the bones and joked about it and like hit it with the shovel again, and he ended up like being paralyzed or something until he repented of it. I mean, there's all these crazy stories. Anyway, two of the saints Raphael and Saint Nicholas, I think one was a hierodeacon and one was a priest. They were martyred. They're from like the 1400s or something like that. Anyway, they were martyred by the Ottoman Turks. Okay, one of them was I think he had like his head something brutal with the Ottoman. You read the stories about the Ottomans. They did nasty stuff. It was one of those stories. And there was a little girl who was like the mayor of the town's daughter. And again, I forget the details. It's been so long since I read this book, but she was burned alive inside at 8 years old, was burned alive inside of a ceramic jar in front of her parents. Anyway, and so she's a martyr. They're saints. And anyway, in the 50s, their relics were discovered through visions and dreams over multiple people in this island community, and it became this like international thing. You know who Father Barnabas Powell is?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't really follow him too much anymore, but I believe he's still at this parish. The name of his parish in Georgia is Saints Raphael, Nicholas, and Irene.
Okay.
And so anyone in the Greek church that's watching this, you'll know exactly who these saints are. Anyway, my point in bringing this up is that Photios Kontoglou, one of my favorite iconologists and iconographers from the 20th century, he was profoundly impacted by this story. And I believe he had a bit of a supernatural encounter, or a preternatural, whatever the correct, miraculous encounter. And he wrote a best-selling book about what happened on Lesbos in Greece at the time. So that was my little rabbit trail, because you haven't heard of it. But anyway, Photios Kontoglou, he wrote all these great things about iconography, and he was very critical of Western art. I've read most of what I can get my hands on that's in English. And even though I respect him a lot, And even though, I mean, I won't get it, but I painted a little iconographic portrait of him that I have hanging in my studio. I love him. Okay. I disagree with him a lot on a lot of things. And there's, I encourage people to seek out what he has written, not because I agree with everything he says, but because he was sort of I don't want to say single-handedly because he didn't, but he was sort of a jump-off point or a catalyst for this great movement in Greek iconography, sort of away from Western, what is sometimes referred to as academic or naturalistic art and iconography, and more towards the Byzantine aesthetic that we know as iconography. Now, there's been theological significance that's been attached after the fact to the way that our iconography looks. That didn't come around first and then the iconography developed. It was sort of overlaid on the top of it. There's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes it's presented in our parishes or presented by well-meaning people as if everything that's repeated about iconography is dogmatically defined. And that's simply not necessarily true. A lot of that stuff's not really that old, but anyway, so there's a place for exploring the development of iconography within the tradition in our own culture, in our own cultural context. But the problem is that you have to have a strong, secure, vibrant, Orthodox cultural ethos in order to do that and not depart into to the left or the right, depart into what I would consider error. Okay. That is above my pay grade. Like, for example, they're sort of doing that. There's a movement for that in Russia and Romania and Orthodox countries. And I think that we need to, in America, sort of look to what's going on as far as iconography goes. Look to what's going on there in these Orthodox countries as far as contemporary iconography as sort of a guide as to where we should go. Because as Americans, we tend to have a propensity to be very individualistic. That's just part of our culture. I mean, that's us, as you know, the American exceptionalism and, you know, rugged individualism or whatever. We're very individualistic people, and so we tend to take that a little too far. So when I say I'd love to see more natural-born American iconographers, it's still going to be a really long time before we can say we have our own uniquely American style of iconography, because we're not at our core an Orthodox culture. And frankly, I don't think we ever will be. So, I mean, I don't know. God, you know, we'll see what God has in store. You never know. But we need to lean into Greece, Russia, Romania, Serbia. We need to lean into these countries from where we got orthodoxy. But at the same time, we as Americans and American iconographers, we also need to realize that it's not just about reproducing icons to look exactly like they do from 1500s, 1600s, whatever. We need to be aware of the tradition, but also understand that it's going to develop in its own way here, and not necessarily fixate upon just copying these old icons, if that makes sense. Kind of a long-winded thing. I'm choosing my words carefully because whenever I have these conversations, people misunderstand what I'm trying to say, and I always get angry emails. So I'm being a little careful, but I don't want to come off.
You're quite articulate. So this is.
I don't want to come off as like I'm saying like I'm some authority, because that's not true at all. These are just my personal views as an artist and as an iconographer. And, you know, I've thought about this a lot, and I've oscillated between these two camps. And you can kind of see that in my work, to be honest. And I still do it to this day. You know, like last week, I was working on something, and I was like, I'm just gonna, I'm really just gonna stick with this prototype exactly. I'm not really gonna deviate, And then this week I had another project I had to finish up, where I leaned more into being a little more contemporary with how I'm doing things. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a never-ending struggle as an iconographer, trying to know to be creative, but also not be intentionally creative, if that makes sense. Like
Sure.
it just sort of is something that happens. It's not
Yep.
something you need to strive after. If that
Right.
makes sense.
I have experience with that in my own artistic,
That's right.
yeah, experience. So I agree with, this, I agree with you that we do need to have some, young Orthodox, some artists, people who have artistic talent should get into iconography. And you might not realize this, but your YouTube page is, if you keep doing that, which I encourage you to, that could be planting seeds. You don't realize it, but you might be, we have a lot of young men coming into the church right now, and some of them could have some artistic talent. So I do encourage you to continue with those videos. They are quite well done, and I hope that everybody watching this will. There's links in the description below, so I hope everybody will go and check it out and subscribe to his YouTube channel. And the podcast you mentioned, that's separate from your YouTube channel, right? That's iconographer.
It's in conjunction with that. I'm going to release that on, the usual podcast, like, Apple or the usual podcast platforms, but it's going to be on the same exact channel, just in conjunction with my iconography tutorials. So, yeah.
Now I do want to show your, just go to your, I'm going to show your website to people real quick, but I did have one more question. Do you have any more commissions for the monastery at the moment? The
last one I did was a St. John of San Francisco. And then I have a gazillion like in progress icons, but yes, there's one more icon that I am doing. It's a small one similar to this, like this size. Avitrifon has the relics of Saint Anastasia of Rome, and so I'll be sending that over probably sometime around the first of the year. That'll be done. But yeah, nothing big planned. I've sort of planted the seed about maybe possibly doing something for somewhere on their walls. Maybe, I don't know if they'll ever go that route, but I volunteered for that if they ever want to do that. So we'll see. He always puts me to work with something, so I'm sure he'll find something.
Okay, let me let's see. I'm going to share a screen here. Let me just give me a moment. Iconography, share. So this is Shayne's website, which you've had this domain for quite a while, right? And when did you make this? I wasn't able to find it for a while.
Yeah, I've had the domain for a while. Every single thing I do is I have to do it, basically. So I had to build the website, so it took me ages to do, and it's still not completed. I just needed to get it up. So
oh wow, so you have that skill set too, huh?
It wasn't. I don't want to misrepresent. It wasn't difficult. I did it on like a website builder, you know what I mean?
Okay.
But yeah, I had the domain for a while, and it was up for a little while, and then I wanted to sort of revamp the store that I have, and so.
Okay, it looks like he has. Looks like Shayne got cut off. This is a bummer. I'm gonna wait and see if maybe he might come back on in a moment. If you're listening, if you can still hear Shayne, you're welcome to jump back in to the stream. But I'm gonna go ahead and show his webpage for you guys. And so here's some icons examples of the icons that he's done. So this is at ShayneSwenson.com, and here's the front. He has also, if you're wanting to get in contact him, here is the that forum that he was talking about. So if you want to commission an icon, you can come here. And so he also does other things, portraits and design. So I just wanted to show everybody. Oh, here he is. All right. Okay, looks like you had gotten cut off.
Yeah, we had a power surge.
Oh, bummer. Wow, that fixed pretty quickly.
Yeah.
If anybody in the chat has any questions, if you want to think of them, now would be the time. We're not a monetized channel, so you can just put them in the chat. And if you have any questions for Shayne, is there anything you would like me to pull up on here on your website?
Oh no, I mean maybe just the homepage. I don't know if you already showed that.
Oh right, yeah, I did when you were.
Yeah, that's it. That was pretty straightforward site.
What is this that you're painting here?
That's just a mural icon of the Mandelion on canvas.
Where is that?
It's here sitting over there. It's just.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said you have like, where are some of the places that you said you have besides All Merciful Savior Monastery, you have other churches and monasteries where your work is?
Yeah, there's I've had icons commissioned. There's a couple different monasteries in Greece. I've sent sold icons to people in Greece, Serbia, England, France.
Wow.
Russia, individuals, and then there's been a couple churches all over the States, and then I've had, I can't remember. Yeah, I did. There in Belarus, that's what it was. There was a. I did a commission for a church in Belarus, like a panel icon. Yeah, a couple other places too, South Africa, whatnot.
How did those people find out about you? Is on the internet?
Yeah, probably. I would assume. Yeah, probably my Instagram account, and
okay.
Having Abbot Trifon constantly, doing his blog posts with icons I've done,
right,
talking about me.
Okay. Yeah,
that definitely helps. But yeah, just doing that sort of thing. I've done several portrait. Oh, there goes my crazy German shepherds. If you can hear them.
Not really.
Oh, okay, they're extremely loud right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I've done a couple portraits of like Elder Frem that have been in a few of his monasteries here in the States, and then people will see those, and it's just it's been through basically word of mouth and then the internet and whatnot. God's definitely blessed me with that. So.
Okay, so I guess we don't have any questions, but this has been an awesome interview. Do you have anything you want to tell people about? I guess this is your opportunity for getting in contact with you, your socials, that kind of thing.
Yeah, if you go on my website, I think in the description here there's a few links to or whatever. But if you go on my website, there's a social media tab, and you can find all my social media there. I have a Twitter, Instagram, and a Facebook. I'm mulling over TikTok, but man, I feel like I'm a little too old to do the TikTok thing. But my kids keep saying to do it, but I don't know. I don't know if I ever will. If you're interested in commissioning an icon, I'd love to work with you on something like that. Just send me a message through the form on my website. Also, if you are in need of any sort of, like, I do graphic design and stuff too. I've done logos for churches. I've done a ton of branding and other design for the Orthodox Media Company that I do work for. So that sort of thing, if you're interested in that, there's also a form you can send me a request for information on that. And then just subscribe on my YouTube and keep your ear open for that podcast, which should be coming out after the first of the year, and any more of the tutorial videos that I've been doing as well. If you have any questions about iconography specifically, you can email me via my website as well, or on any of my social media as well. So
We do have one question here. What does his shirt say?
it's just a band I like. It's a band called Emperor. It's a metal band I love.
Okay.
Yeah. I like this causes pearl clutching among many, but I've been super into metal for 35 years, so I like all different kinds of metal. That's all I'll say. If you're into metal, you know who Emperor is. So.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, well, thank you so much, Shayne. This has been awesome episode. So that will be it for the day. So thank you everybody who's watching, and we'll see you all next time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yep.